Rig review on our WhoopaCabra build. So the whole goal with this was to build a scale pre-runner, and I think we nailed it. So we used 3/16 rod for all of the cage work that you see here and the front bumper. This whole front end actually unbolts off too in case it meets a curb at high speed. So it bolts up as you would normally bolt up a front bumper, and you can use your plastic bumper mounts on this chassis, and you can use a wide array of bumpers that could bolt on. What we did was we used our Element IFS bulkhead tab and mounted that on front of A-arm mounts, and then we built a skid plate brace. I don't know if you can see that there. There's a couple of 3/16 rods, so basically this thing is framed in 3/16, and then there's tabs to bolt this to it. And this is actually a steel skid plate, not aluminum. I've done a few aluminum ones and they just get all caved out. So originally when we built this, it was all 10.2 drivetrain, so we had 10.2 axles, 10.2 kit trans, and then Element IFS V1. We use the V1 because you're able to put the long travel kit that we offer on here. And what that allows for is 1 inch overall width, wider than stock, but the most important part is by pushing that pivot point out, you get about 1.75 inches of travel using a 90mm shock. This has a 100mm shock. The way that we got away with using a 100mm shock is using the axial shock towers, which are 10mm taller than the Element ones. So the Element ones are about 25mm from the mounting hole for the lower part and the upper mounting hole for your shock. And the axial ones are 35mm. 10mm more shock, 10mm more total stroke. Having that wider control arm means that much more travel. So that in the front. And in the back, the way that I set this one up, I do like to run the bomber trailing arms on the pre-runner builds. It's got a better look, I think. That longer pivot point, you're not going to get as much growth in your wheelbase as you cycle through the travel. With the shorter gatekeeper style ones, which also work, as seen here, you see the gatekeeper floorboards with that mount to run your trailing arms. With the gatekeeper floorboards, you can basically run a gatekeeper back half, including the shock mounts too. So that is also cool. That might be a little bit better for U4 builds, a shorter breakover. It just kind of climbs up and over rocks a little bit easier. This thing's meant to go fast and through the dirt, through the jumps, through the whoops. And you guys can see that almost you can almost touch the skid plate on the floor there when it's all the way fully compressed. What I ended up using in the back is, I think it's a 5-inch shock. That's what I was looking at, was to try to get a 5-inch Pro Spec Proline shock to match the front. I didn't have any on hand and I couldn't get them before Axial Fest, so what I ended up using was a Baja race shock, and it had the right spring rate. I had some other shocks, but I didn't have the right rates. This was the best spring rate I had for my situation here. And we had the 10.2 transmission in there before. I have since swapped it out to the VFD. That 10.2 kit trans was okay, but with the 5700 kV motor, it was screaming. It did not like all those RPMs. So we put in the VFD. That changed the driving style of this a little bit. By putting more weight forward, it puts more weight on the front end, making the front end do a bit more work. So we're probably going to swap that out to your standard old school 3-gear axial transmission. I really like the SSD high ratio version for these pre-runner builds. I've used one for about 3 years now, just 3 different builds, and it holds up great. Aluminum case, and it comes with 2 spools in the kit to replace your idle gear and your main drive gear. You use the same top gear and top shaft from a 10.2 3-gear transmission or like a Wraith transmission. But anyway, I think I'm going to end up putting that in here just because I want to move the weight back a little bit. And the reason you want your weight further back on these pre-runners, this is actually where the battery mounts. But as you put the weight in the back, what it does is it helps lighten the front, and it just soaks it all up, soaks up the whoops and jumps and bumps, and it does handle quite well for the desert style driving. Definitely not a crawler. These WhoopaCabra rails are made of 2.5mm stainless steel, and they're easy to weld to. And I say easy to weld to because having that thicker material to weld to is going to be less likely to blow through it if you're going to be MIGging or TIG welding. It's just a little bit more forgiveness here. And being stainless, there's a lot less prep for the fabricator. Literally just kind of wipe it off and go. It's basically prepped and ready to weld to, but you don't have to weld to it. You can do bolt-on shock towers in the back, and you can do bolt-on shock towers in the front, and you can use your side plates, your normal floorboards for axial or element, or the VFD ones. Those will all work on these chassis. The big three crawler groups, but in my eyes, those are the scale choices to pull from. The WhoopaCabra rails have features to accommodate things such as trailing arms long, like the Bomber, trailing arms short, like on the Gatekeeper, and you can also run them linked. And the linked setup is no different, but you're still going to run your shock tower in this area, unless you ran a longer wheelbase. But the idea is you're going to run your shock tower sort of like this, and with the Gatekeeper availability, it makes it really easy to get a cool desert style build going. On to the power plant. So I have a censored 5700 kV Castle. This is running a Copperhead ESC, and I actually was lucky enough to have a booth next to Castle. So I told them how I drove it and stuff, and they played with the tuning on it, and I had Castle tune it for driving short course, and it works pretty good. I enjoy it. This is a super fun rig to drive. As far as the steering servo goes, the one that's in there took a dump, so we won't even mention it. Gonna swap it out for something different. Wheel-wise, I really like the Proline Rock Shooters. It's been my favorite pre-runner wheel for a long time. I think I have 6 sets of them right now, just floating around on different cars. And I really like the Trexus tires. I hope these are still around. I know they killed the BFG All-Terrains, which is the other ideal tire to have. It just looks good. Kind of look like center lines. But these Trexus wheels look really good on the pre-runners, in my opinion. They have a tall, skinny profile, and having all that extra sidewall too. You know, that's your first line of suspension absorption right there is your sidewall on your tire. But next we have the hot seats to kind of cover up the interior, and this was the very first prototype Fast Dash. Made this for the car and was like, you know what? I think this will be a helpful solution for the other builders making tube chassis. And it has our gauge cluster in there too. Just fills it out nicely. It doesn't take up too much room. So I mean, driving it in the dirt and the dust, it doesn't really collect up. It gets everywhere, but it's easy to clean. This thing is a super fun rig to drive, and they're fairly easy to build. Like I said, you don't have to build a cage to enjoy all the amenities of the WhoopaCabra. So this kick style chassis allows you to have a ton more up travel than you would compared to your Element or your axial stock rails. And that's really what I was going for. I wanted to have more travel with longer shocks, but I wanted to keep that normal ride height. I didn't want to be running around like a monster truck. So this thing with the battery in it, it's got the look. And had this body painted up by RC Dead People a couple years ago. This body's been on a couple different build concepts, but I think it ended up best here on the WhoopaCabra, which is now our newest t-shirt and sweatshirt graphic too. Thanks for watching.